expression of the democratic view. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and with me today I have a man who has had a tremendous effect, I think, upon our lives here in East Hampton.
Oh,
well, I do agree. I think that because I've seen so many of your shows, and also I think you've put and guided Guildhall, which is, you know, it's like the staple of East Hampton, and you really have helped it to become a very important part of our lives, a place to go and to have culture and to see things. And it's Josh Gladstone, and he is the artistic or former artistic
that's
director.
right. I retired from Guildhall on Thursday of last week.
Oh, wow.
Today's Wednesday. It's been a few days.
Not even a week.
Yeah.
Wow. So tell me something about you. I want to know something about you first. I want to know where you were born and raised, went to school, and how you got out here. I know you weren't born here.
No, I was born in New York City on the Lower East Side, and my father was a dentist at NYU in dental school, and my mother, like you, was a school teacher down in the Alphabet City. And I lived as a little baby in New York City with them, and then they moved after a few years from the city to the suburbs, where my mother's father was also a dentist, and my father's father was a dentist. And so I come from a long line of dentists.
Oh my God! What suburb?
Well, I grew up in Watchung, New Jersey, which was in Somerset County, about 40 minutes outside of Manhattan. And my father had a practice for many years in Union, New Jersey, and his father had a practice in Springfield, New Jersey, and her father had a practice in Union, New Jersey, and they all said, "Don't be a dentist." My grandfather on my father's side was an entertainer, as a matter of fact. Saul Gladstone used to perform up in the Catskills back in the 1930s. It's where he met his wife, who was a violin player, and he was a tumbler and a performer. And he used to perform in revues, and he played with Danny Kaye and Phil Silvers. He was a great second banana, my grandfather.
Wow.
And then the war came, and he went to be a dentist, and to be in the war. He served as a medical officer, and he came back. And that was the end of show business for him professionally, although he never gave up on it. He loved to play the ukulele when I was a kid, and he had the harmonica around his neck, and he would play and sing. And as a kid, I would hear endless stories about his working with June Havoc, and endless stories about him working with Phil Silvers in the mountains, and back in the glory days of the Catskills. And I think some of that rubbed off on me, because growing up in suburban New Jersey, I started to do a lot of plays, and all the grammar school plays all the way through high school. I did all the musicals in high school, and I knew that I liked theater. And they said, "Don't be a dentist, but at the same time, get a degree in something that you can work in, just in case." So I went to Colgate University for my undergraduate, and I got degrees in English and art history there.
Oh, good.
But I did all the shows at Colgate. I loved to be in the theater. But that school is not known at that time in the 80s for its theater program, although it was good, serviceable. I did get to meet some very interesting professors there, and particularly in the performing arts and video department. And when I got out of Colgate, I went back down to Jersey City. But I had always had a connection to the Hamptons, because my cousin, David M. Brandenburg, his family, had a house in Amagansett in the Dunes. And they bought it back in the 70s. She was an educator at Columbia University. My uncle was an engineer for AT&T. And they bought a little house in the Dunes. And so every summer, my dad took about a month or so off, and we would come out and rent a house in the Dunes near there. And that was every year growing up. For 15 years or more, we would bike around and go to Brent's to buy comic books at Brent's, and we would ride bikes to the duck pond, and we would go to Gardner Beach, and we would go to Napeague Lane Beach, and we were very industrious. We would do lemonade stands up at the walkway up at the end of Gardner Drive, my cousin and my brother and I, and my other cousin Neil. And so when I got out of Colgate and then I went to New York City, and I started to work regionally in the Minneapolis Children's Theater and Shakespeare Theater, and I started to do some jobs. That led me to conservatory training at Circle in the Square underneath Broadway, down in the basement there, working with Ted Mann and company. It's where I met my wife, Kate Muth, although at the time she was not my wife. We were both involved with other wonderful people, but it didn't evolve until a couple of years later. But after Circle in the Square, when I went to the Children's Theater in Minneapolis, and I had studied so much Shakespeare, and I had studied so many of the classics, and did Chekhov as a final performance project, and I got to Minneapolis, and I played the mayor of Whoville in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and they put me in a prosthetic nose, and then they said, okay, come here into the fitting room, because the next show you're going to do is Babar the Elephant King, and we're going to fit you for the hind quarters of the two-person Babar costume. And you came out of Circle in the Square, you're going to play Babar's ass in Minneapolis. And that's when I said, hold on, this is not, I don't want to do it. And I fled Minneapolis, even though I could have stayed and worked at the Guthrie. But I got out of there, and my cousin David was in the city at the time at Meet the Composer, and it was the dead of winter. And he wasn't loving it there, and we both kind of looked at each other. This was in 1995, and said, wouldn't it be great to do theater at the beach where we love to go every summer since we were kids? Yeah. How about Hampton's Shakespeare Festival? That's got a ring to it. And it did have a ring to it because sure enough, he had a relative in the Suffolk County Parks Department, Michael Frank, who said, yeah, there's a place in Montauk, the Third House, which is underutilized. And because I'm the commissioner at the park, I'm going to get you a special permit to do Shakespeare there. And we said, wow. We drove out in the dead of winter. It was snowy. We stayed in a little motel in the center of town by the post office. And we said, look at this place. This could be great for outdoor Shakespeare. I called all my friends from Circle in the Square, every one of them unemployed. And I said, I think I got a place for us to go and make a show. Let's do Romeo and Juliet. We talked to my friend Torquil Campbell, who at that time was a young Canadian actor, went on to become a rock and roll star with the band Stars. But Torquil said, let's do Romeo and Juliet. We got all our classmates, many of our classmates. We raised a few dollars. My mother, who was an artist, took another one of her friends, and they painted backdrops on canvas that we hung on poles and made these boxes that we stood on, and that was our set.
Wow.
My mother painted the set. We built these blue boxes that we painted. And I got my friends from Circle. They lived in these, at the time, the cabins weren't even renovated. They were dilapidated. And we didn't know what to expect, David and I. David did original music. He's a composer. And I played Capulet. And we had a local, Judith Weiss, I think, is a friend of the family. And she had a choral group that she was with. And they were madrigal singers. So the opening night of the Hampton Shakespeare Festival in 1996, she had a group of madrigal singers. And we were up in the cabins getting dressed for Romeo and Juliet first night. We had been rehearsing in the park, very little electricity, very little lighting. But we heard the madrigal singers cresting up the hill at Theodore Roosevelt Park. And it was a beautiful sound. And the actors descended down the hillside together in a jubilant entrance, running through the grass with balloons coming out of the boxes. And there were 500 people sitting there on the grass on our opening night. Never had done a Shakespeare show in the Hamptons. And I looked at David, and he looked at me, and we said, wow, we got something here.
Yeah.
So next summer, my wife, Kate Muth, came out from the city. She was an actress. I had a big crush on her. And she had just gotten through a breakup, and all of our friends said, why don't you bring Kate out? And I directed. This was my directorial debut, Midsummer Night's Dream. I'd only been an actor, never been a producer.
Wow.
And now I was a producer, and I thought, I'm going to make my directing debut. And they said, why doesn't you bring Kate out from the city? I said, really? Kate Muth would be available to come out and do this? And they said, sure. She's in a terrible breakup. She's living up on 109th Street. Bring her out. I said, okay, she could play Moth. I still had one fairy left in the ensemble to cast. 1997, I spent the whole summer chasing after her in Montauk. We used to go to Dick Avedon's house. Dick came to the first show, and he loved the energy that he saw, the purity of these young actors, many attractive young people. And so he would have us out to his house in Montauk with his good friends, the Johans, Ed and Dawn Johan, who are caretakers, were at that time, and their kids, and they loved the Shakespeare. And the little kids from the Avedon house. The Johann kids would come and watch entranced as we did the plays. So I chased my wife all around the hills of Montauk. She had nothing to do with me. And then a year of that, in 1998, we came back and did As You Like It. I played Jake Weiss. We had another fellow named Michael Landman direct. David kept doing music. The festival was growing. And that's when I stopped chasing after my wife. She said, "Oh, why did he stop chasing me?" And then we got involved. And then we got married very quickly. We got married after dating a few months. We said, "Oh, this is going to be a thing, isn't it?" And we got married, and then we got pregnant on our honeymoon right after we went up to the Johann's house in Maine. We got pregnant, and by October, Halloween, a month after the honeymoon and after we did 1999 The Tempest, we had a kid on the way. And we said, "Oh my God, how are we going to live? We got a kid on the way."
Yeah.
And sure enough, I was temping, not making any money doing Shakespeare, and I saw a listing in the New York Times while I was at a reception desk for a company that did placement, career placement. And it was a little 2-line listing in the Times, I'll never forget. And it said, "Guildhall seeks theater director, East Hampton, with a phone number." This was 1999. I said, Guildhall. David and I had thought about bringing one of our shows to Guildhall. I knew Guildhall as a kid, having seen stuff out as a kid. So I pursued that. And I remember saying to my wife, with the baby on the way, making no money, living in Brooklyn, I'm going to get that job. And sure enough, Ruth Appelhoff, God rest her soul,
I remember her too.
new executive director in 1999, got hired, and she was going to bring in a whole new team. I remember she brought in a new curator at that time who didn't last more than less than a year, Simon, but then she brought Christina back, and she hired me with the permission of Mickey Strauss, and at that time Charles Bullock was on the board, and a guy named Herb Schmertz was on the board, and Ron Delsner was one of the guys I interviewed with who was on the board. So this was while I had to go through 4 or 5 different interviews, and I went to Delsner's office in the city, very humble, and I didn't know who Delsner was at that time. I had no idea of his reputation. I had no idea of his prominence in the industry. This was the beginning of working at a different level with Guildhall, although I had encountered Avedon and Paul Simon came to the Shakespeare Festival. I started to meet some people that were of interest, and we had some great actors who went on to great things. But okay, so Delsner's office, and he asked me after an interview, "Okay, let's cut to the chase. How much you want?" And I thought about it, making $0 with the baby on the way, and I humbly raised my hand and said, $35,000 would be good. And he said, "No, we can do better than that."
Oh,
and
my.
I was so lowball that he bumped me up right on the spot, and I got hired by Ruth and Mickey, and we moved out here with the baby in April of 2000. And the baby was born in the city at a birthing center in Manhattan. And then we drove out. My in-laws from Illinois drove my wife and the newborn out. I had gone back and forth. I remember Ruth and Janine Diner, the managing director, we were trying to install. It was the first time Guildhall had an automated ticket system in 2000. And somehow, me, who had a background as an actor and a little bit as a producer and director, they're like, "Install the automated ticket system." And I was wrestling, and my wife was in slow to start labor, and I was at 1 in the morning in the box office trying to put the system in, trying to figure it out. And then I'm getting a call, "Come, the baby's coming." I went to Brooklyn, the baby's coming, and slow to start, natural childbirth, the baby 30 hours labor. I get a call from Ruth, and Janine said, "You better get back here. We open in a couple of days, and this system is not right." Oh my God, I got to run from Brooklyn back to the East Hampton to get this. I finally, 4 in the morning, I was back. The next day, I got the system up and running, and then my wife said, "It's happening." I run back to Brooklyn.
Oh, God.
And that was Guildhall. That was the beginning of the John Drew Theater when the rain came through the roof. Now remember, this theater had fallen on some disrepair.
Yes.
And rain would come onto the stage manager's head when it was rain. And we had an electric system that Joe Marchese, who God rest his soul, passed away, but he kept it running. It was a dinosaur from the 1950s, a patch bay that they didn't even have parts for anymore.
Oh my
Was it
God.
used to spark, and it was rain coming on it, and you could put your foot, you put your finger through the upholstery of a chair in the John Drew Theater, and if you pressed hard enough, it went right down in the springs, and the foam and dust came out. I mean, the theater needed work. But
Oh,
I was
wow.
happy to have a theater indoors. I was happy to be making a paycheck. And Ruth was so welcoming and was a great person to work
Yes,
with.
I remember her.
And then Christina and Janine were there at that time, and many other staff members through the years were there. And Ruth had a background in museums and fine arts and some poetry readings, but she didn't know much about the theater.
Wow.
And I didn't know much about running a theater. I knew about grassroots, and I knew about acting, which I loved, trained for my whole life, a little bit about directing, but we figured it out. And I spent 21 and a half years. My son August grew up in Springs. We lived in Clearwater Beach on Underwood Drive.
Oh, thank
For
me.
my father, we couldn't find a place to live. My father, the dentist, said, "I'm going to buy a house. I don't want my grandson, my baby grandson, I don't want him to live in the back of your Toyota. So I'm going to buy a house. You'll rent it from me," which lasted about 11 years. My son grew up. He went to Spring School. My wife and I taught Shakespeare at Spring School while he was a kid there. My son started to act. He loved growing up around the theater. In those days, we were encouraged by Ruth to do a lot of Shakespeare, which is what I knew and loved, and many plays. Such an interesting trajectory of doing plays at Guildhall through the years. But in those early days, the work I'm most proud of was the work we did with many community-based actors, professionals who are here, who relocated out here, people like Joe DeSane and Jonathan Peters, back Tina Jones, and Minerva Selza, many wonderful actors. And my wife, Kate, of course, and would help me choreograph, and I would direct, and she would act, and it was great. My son grew up around it. He would crawl on the aisles, wondering why he wasn't in the show. He would grab, in Julius Caesar, he took the sword and the armor. And I remember during a performance, the audience is sitting there in Guildhall in the John Drew Theater, and I'm up on stage playing Cicero, a cameo, and they're doing a big scene up there, and I look out in the aisle, something's going on, there's a little commotion. There's my 3-year-old son, August, crawling on his belly, doing a combat crawl down the aisle, the slope of the John Drew Theater, wearing Roman armor, working his way to the stage because he's going to be in the show.
Oh my God.
Know me for Brutus. And my wife and I said, "Oh boy, he's in for it. He's got the bug." He did Hamlet with us. When we did Hamlet, he played the baby. He did Grisha in the Cherry Orchard, and so he got a job through our friend Tony Walton, who at that time we were working with, doing a couple. He started to do so. Tony has a relationship with the John Drew Theater that goes back decades. He's actually related to John Drew, the namesake of the theater.
Oh, really?
And we used to do readings with Tony, and then we did, I can't remember, I think the first play we did with him, maybe it was in 2005 when we did Moby Dick Rehearsed. But by that time, my son was way into it, and Tony got us a connection with, he said, "Your son is loving the theater," and I think it was Costa Utopia at Lincoln Center. My son went, and at the age of 6 was on Broadway. My wife and I were like, wow, we moved to the Hamptons, and our son's got a career all of a sudden in the city. So we were living in Springs. We were back and forth to the city for my son. He did some cartoons and television as a young. My wife and I driving back and forth, back at Guildhall doing shows. Great years, happy years. At some point, we shifted over to Phyllis Reed, the artist, Phyllis Reed's house. John Reed, we moved into the place where he has an old converted barn back up, and it happens to be a house that was right next to Ruth Appelhoff's house on Old Stone Highway. Oh. And I remember we were looking for a place. My dad wanted to sell. We needed to rent a place, and Jenny at the general store said, "Oh, check out John Reed's place. The guy who's there is moving out." And my wife went and checked it out. My son's in middle school, and Kate came back and said, "You're not going to want to live there because it's the house right next to your boss's house, sharing a backyard."
Wow.
And I said, "Let's look at it." And I fell in love. And I moved in, and Gary is there to this day. We're friendly. He's our neighbor.
Oh, you still live
Oh,
there?
he's there. Gary's there, so we ran shows upon shows upon shows. My wife began a theater dance company called the Neopolitical Cowgirls,
I
which
know them.
she did work with the East Hampton Historical Society at Mulford Rep,
Yeah.
where we did shows in the barn at Mulford Rep, and
Yes.
shows at Guildhall, and the Shakespeare Festival. David kept running it very successfully for a number of years. At some point, he had sort of wound it down, but it had a good 10-year run. We were supportive of that. My wife started to do immersive outdoor programs in Montauk, scavenger hunts called Zima, and we did a number of years in the Mulford Rep, and at Guildhall, still the place was falling apart. So a big renovation took place you may remember, in 2006 was our last season in the old John Drew. And then there was Robert A.M. Stern led a big project. We closed in 2007. We did a show right here at LTV across at the East Hampton Studios when Fraser ran East Hampton Studios, and we did Picasso at La Pana Gil, beautiful. Sebastian Paczynski did the lights, and we had projections, and it was a gorgeous off-site production. Very proud of that one, too. And then in 2008, it was such a production, 2007, that we just did a few small things here and there. We did American Ballet Theater at the home, at the grounds of Mickey Strauss and Layla Strauss's house. He was then a board chair. And then we reopened the new John Drew Theater with a full, it wasn't so much a renovation as it was a restoration of the glory days of the John Drew Theater. Brian Lever repainted the ceiling beautifully as the circus tent that you see there today, which was a curious choice back in the 30s anyway. It was just sort of an arbitrary, Embry, I think was the name of the guy who painted it. But it was, it was done in a Cirque du Soleil style. It was very arbitrary and popular in the 30s when Guildhall was born. But Ruth wanted to recreate the details and the beauty down to the trim and the marble floor in the bathrooms. Everything was fixed up. There was no more rain coming in through the ceiling. It was a renovation that was beautiful. Liza Minnelli opened us up with a concert in 2009. There was a ribbon cutting. And then Harris Yulin, who had been enjoying some of the work we had been doing with readings and with Tony Walton, directed Glass Menagerie, starring Amy Irving and Eben Moss-Backrack, who's gone on to have a wonderful career. Louisa Krause was in that show. And that was the beginning of the new era, the modern era of the John Drew Theater in 2009. And from there, we caught fire, I think, because Alec came and he loved what we were doing with the renovation, the restoration. He said, I think I'd like to do a show here next year. And so he tapped Tony Walton to do Equus in 2010. We produced that, and that went very well. People loved it. And so we started to do some big marquee shows. In 2011, Jerry Seinfeld directed a run of Colin Quinn's show, which had just moved from Broadway, and we were able to get it for a few weeks. And I don't know how much I should run through. Are we out of time? I'm going.
Almost.
All right. Well, there's a lot of history. We just celebrated our 90th anniversary at Guildhall, 90th anniversary. And of the 90 years, I was there for 21 and a half. And my son, the little kid crawling up the lane, is now graduating this year from Emerson College with a degree in film and television comedy writing. He's going to be moving to L.A. for the spring final semester. He'll probably stay in L.A. with some young buddies and live in an apartment out there and be a writer. And my wife and I look around at each other. We love being in Springs. We love the house we're in with John Reed's house. But 21 and a half years is a good run at one place. We did a lot of wonderful shows, had a lot of gorgeous productions, a lot of flops that were horrible. Part of it. That's part of it. You're only as good as your last show. And in 2019 was the best season we ever had. Attendance and sales, celebrities. 2020, the pandemic, all the programming wiped off the table. But somehow we managed to create in the backyard at Guildhall an outdoor backyard theater. Very proud of that.
I did that too. I was there.
Backyard theater.
Yeah.
And then in 2021, pandemic still going on right up until Memorial Day. Governor Cuomo then Memorial Day says, okay, people can come back inside. We were planning on being outside the entire summer. We shifted everything, went back inside. At the end of the pandemic, beautiful work-offs, I said, I can do another, there's another renovation coming. It's going to be amazing. Bran Ferrin, who has a history with the place, is going to lead it. And I said, 21 and a half years is a good run. Let's turn the baton over and let somebody else come in and see what they can do, have fun, as I've had fun. And now I got another chapter in me. I don't know what it is, Phyllis.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We got 1 minute left. What are you going to do?
We'll see. I don't know. I'm going to dive into the unknown with 21 years having been spent at Guildhall, but a lot of goodwill, a lot of good connections.
Oh, and some wonderful things that you have given to the community.
It's been my great honor
Yes.
to serve as the steward of that theater, and
Yes.
I'll always love it. But I feel like now it's time to focus. I'm 53 years old. I think I have another chapter in me. Maybe I'll act again. Maybe I'll direct. Maybe I'll be an independent producer. Do something to make a few bucks. You never know.
Listen, my money's on you, hon.
God
I
bless.
think you're going to do a lot. We're
We'll see.
looking forward to it because I have seen you on stage and I know how powerful you are. And I know a lot about acting.
Yes, you
I've been
do.
around it all my life,
God bless.
since I was a kid. And let me tell you, you've got it.
Thank you.
So I hope that you move forward and do things that you really want to do, that you feel in here you must do.
Well, we only got one go round.
Yes?
I fought back cancer and I came out of it, and now I'm looking around and thinking, okay, all the world's a stage.
I like that. All the world's a stage. That's a great line. Somebody must have said that.
I think it was Zero Mostel.
No, I don't think it was Zero Mostel. Although he said plenty of good things. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and we wish you the best. And we thank you for what you have done for our community.
You are welcome, and it has been an honor. So thank you, Phyllis, for the chance to shoot the breeze and tell my story.
So that's it.
That's a wrap.
Onward and on and forward, and do whatever you feel you want to do.